Yellowstone, Kayce Dutton. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor, continuing my analysis of major characters from Yellowstone. It would be appreciated if you would post links to these videos, perhaps in forums where people discuss Yellowstone, particularly with regard to the analysis of the characters that are involved. Bear in mind, as usual, the caveats about plot development and character arcs, and there may well be spoilers ahead. Kayce John Dutton is a horseman and ranch hand, son of ranch owner John Dutton and his wife Evelyn Dutton. He's married to Monica Long. Kayce was born on the 24th of April 1990 into a ranching family. Before his family inherited the ranch, his ancestors had already settled in the Yellowstone vicinity. John and Evelyn Dutton had 3 more children. Kayce had 2 brothers, Lee and Jamie, and a sister, Beth. They grew up together on the Yellowstone Dutton Ranch. His mother died when he was young. On March 30th, 1997, she was out riding with Beth and Kayce and fell off her horse. Beth went to look for help, and Kayce, young as he was, tried everything to protect her and stop her from dying, which exhibits, at that stage at least, the manifestation of emotional empathy. Help came too late, and she had breathed her last breath when her husband found her. Kayce witnessed his mother's death. That potentially could suggest a lack of control environment, being exposed to such trauma. In July of that year, Kayce's father, John Dutton, met Rip Wheeler, an orphan boy that just killed his own father after he'd murdered Rip's mother and brother. John Dutton welcomed the new boy onto his family's ranch, giving the orphan a home again. Kayce later started his own family by marrying Monica Long, the granddaughter of Indian elder Felix Long, and the sister of Robert Long. Kayce, in marrying somebody of another racial group, demonstrates an absence of prejudicial behaviours, which suggests, potentially, emotional empathy. Kayce and Monica had a son they named Tate, and they lived on the Broken Rock Indian Reservation, him demonstrating by living amongst her people that he was committed to the relationship and understanding her way of life, again suggestive of emotional empathy. His oldest brother Lee died in a feud with the reservation. Kayce was on the scene and saw his brother get shot by Robert Long, Kayce's brother-in-law. He murdered Robert to protect himself and his brother, but found out he was too late as Lee's gunshot wound turned out to be fatal. Kayce served in the United States Navy as a Navy SEAL. He was in Pakistan during one of his missions and was confronted with a high-value target that used his family to protect himself. When the man started shooting, he couldn't do anything else but start shooting back, killing not only the man, but his wife and daughter as well, something which appears to have caused some trauma for Kayce. At some point, Kayce made it his job to tame wild horses. He did so when he came back from his military service and tried to make a living on the Broken Rock Reservation. When his father gave him a chance to come back on the ranch, Kayce went to live in the bunkhouse and started to work his way back in. He didn't come in expecting any favours because his father was the owner of the ranch, which shows a degree of humility and an absence of a sense of entitlement on his part. Later on, his father appointed him as the new foreman of the ranch, succeeding his brother Lee and Rip Wheeler, and he and his family started to live in the ranch house. Kayce followed in his father and brother's footsteps when he started to work as a livestock agent for the Montana Livestock Association. It gave him a higher authority. In one instance, Kayce and Monica were witness to a drug lab explosion close to the road that they were driving on. They were unhurt, but Kayce had to shoot a man to put him out of his misery, demonstrating a form of emotional empathy, but also the fact that Kayce won't shy from taking decisive action when the occasion requires it. Once when out driving with Tate, he stumbled upon an abandoned van. It turned out that there was an abducted girl in it. Kayce had to kill her 2 abductors and, with help from the girl's father, tried to keep the happenings hidden. However, the remains were discovered and he was arrested by the tribal police. Once again, he wasn't afraid to do the right thing and undertake doing something to protect another person. With help from his brother Jamie, he was able to explain the situation and achieve his freedom. With Rip Wheeler and some other ranch hands, Kayce took part in the hanging of Dan Jenkins, an enemy of the ranch. It could have been the case that he was allowed to die there and then, but instead, both Rip and Kayce decided to use it as a warning, demonstrating again the presence of emotional empathy. There has been some friction between Kayce and Rip Wheeler during the years they've known each other, and there has been fights between the two of them, which demonstrates that Kayce isn't afraid to stand his own ground in certain situations. When the rivalry between the Yellowstone Dutton Ranch and businessman Malcolm and Teal Beck got out of hand, the Becks went after Kayce's son Tate. He was found missing when he was feeding his horse at night. Kayce and other members of the Dutton family were then mobilised to eventually rescue Tate. The length that he went to in order to find and recover his son are demonstrative of his emotional empathy. Kayce is fiercely protective of both his wife and son. He rejected the ranch to go and live on the reservation with Monica, demonstrating his compassion towards her and his willingness to sacrifice his own background for her happiness. Kayce is in line to inherit the family's ranch. He demonstrates that he's somewhat scarred from his time as a soldier, which gives him some internal turmoil. However, his worst conflicts surround the different loyalties between him and his father. Whilst his father, of course, is loyal to the ranch, Kayce splits his loyalties between the Dutton land and its neighbouring Broken Rock Reservation, a sacred part of his chosen family. Kayce, showing that he sees things in shades of grey, seeks to appease both aspects of his life, demonstrating his loyalty to the Dutton ranch while also embracing his wife's background. This is evidenced, for example, by Kayce undergoing an Indian ceremony where he remained in isolation for 4 days and nights without food and water. This is a ritual known as Hamblesea, which literally means to cry for a vision. This takes its toll on Kayce and shows a sacrificial element of his personality, but he's willing to do this not only to understand more about himself, but also to embrace that aspect of his life by virtue of his marriage to his wife. Kayce and his family moved to the ranch, which creates tensions between him and his wife. However, he continues to exhibit his commitment to her and his son by remaining with them and finding a way of resolving the problems. He demonstrates an accountability to his relationship by addressing relationship issues. Kayce, however, is not above utilising the Dutton methods to reach a particular outcome, but this is tempered by his evident emotional empathy. One example of this is where a troublesome cowboy called Walker is to be taken to the train station, which is a euphemism for killing somebody and throwing the body into a deep pit in an unpopulated county, which the Duttons repeatedly use to dispose of those who get in their way. Kayce does not execute the instruction given to him to kill Walker, and instead takes Walker to an actual railway station and tells him to leave and never return to Montana. This demonstrates that he also exhibits emotional empathy for the individual and wishes to resolve the situation without resorting to killing him. In another example of Kayce's emotional empathy, rancher Boyd Nelson drives out to a field where there's a herd of horses grazing. He withdraws a paper from his pocket and glances at it before putting a gun to his temple and pulling the trigger. Kayce is in the office as the new livestock commissioner when he receives a call from Sheriff Haskell informing him of Boyd's death. Haskell won't explain why it's a matter for the livestock commissioner, but instead just asks Kayce to head out to Boyd's ranch. Once there, Haskell hands Kayce the blood-stained paper Boyd was holding onto when he committed suicide. The paper is a formal notice of intent to foreclose document. Kayce feels awful, knowing Boyd has kids that he has left behind. Kayce and the sheriff recognise that the bank will take the horses as part of the foreclosure, and Kayce suggests that they round them up and take them to Billings for sale. If the horses aren't on the property, the bank can't get them. Kayce wants to sell the horses to get money for Boyd's kids, but he's not sure taking them is legal. Haskell assures him that it's not legal. Nevertheless, Kayce decides that he's going to do it anyway. He asks what Haskell would think he would do, and Haskell reveals that Boyd was actually his cousin. "If you want to do it, I'll look away," he says, "but if the bank finds out, you're up to your neck in trouble." Notwithstanding this, Kayce rounds up the horses and spends time and effort selling the horses before going to see the widow and presenting her with a cheque for the value of the horses. Kayce did not do this to be admired or appreciated. He did this because he recognised that it was the right thing to do, even taking the risk that he was engaging in an awful act of interfering with property that, strictly speaking, then belonged to the bank. This act is demonstrative of Kayce's emotional empathy for those around him. Kayce is actually, notwithstanding occasions where he's had to resort to violence, actually a gentle and compassionate person who loves nature and animals. This is shown in his career as a horse tamer and wrangler. He's certainly in touch with his emotions. He demonstrates a good heart and often tries to do the right thing. He exhibits a bit of a rebel streak and is independent. He doesn't like to be told what to do, and he prefers to do things his own way. For instance, he left the Dutton ranch and followed his heart to marry the Indian elder's granddaughter. Kayce has been furnished with some edge as a consequence of his military career and what he experienced during that, which suggests that he may have, perhaps, post-traumatic stress disorder. He has no hesitation in the application of justice, which is demonstrated in the way that he went after his son's abductors and the individuals who were behind the various attacks against the Dutton family. He's a strong believer in justice, which is, of course, an empathic trait. Kayce shows consideration for other people, a protectiveness of his immediate family, a loyalty to his father, and is often pained by his father not always communicating with him. He demonstrates extensive emotional empathy for those around him, compassion and caring, tempered at the appropriate occasions with the necessity of the application of justice. He seeks to straddle two worlds, that of Broken Rock and that of the Dutton Ranch, and is often the conciliatory figure amongst the more contentious family members, often being someone that all parties feel that they're able to talk to and confide in. What is Kayce Dutton? Kayce Dutton is a standard empath with carrier, saviour, and magnet traits. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.